Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me Kyle Winterbottom, a good industry peer and friend of mine, but also importantly, the founder and CEO at Orbition, an award-winning full-service talent solutions provider, recruitment to the layperson, although you might challenge me on that, Kyle, and host of the excellent Driven by Data podcast. So, Kyle, it's a pleasure to have you on the show and have you at the other end of the mic for a change.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be here, mate. And yeah, can safely say now I've made it. I was wondering when I was going to get the invite to the Hub and Spoken podcast, and here we are,
Well, you had
three
you had
years, three
you
years
had
later. But
you had to prove yourself first, mate, and you've done a good job at that. So I'm confident enough for you to be on the show now. That's the thing.
perfect.
Long time coming, and definitely overdue. So good to have you on the show. So we want to talk about just sort of talent and particularly this kind of like issue around job adverts. So you and I have sort of chatted offline and lots of kind of discussion on social like LinkedIn about people moaning about chief data officer adverts wanting 5 years of Python coding and these sorts of things. So I want to talk about job adverts. But before we do that, do you want to introduce yourself to the wonderful audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the data and analytics kind of recruitment and talent space for the last 12 years. Orbition's been going since September 2020, so middle of the COVID pandemic. Set up the business from my mother-in-law's back bedroom, sat on top of a sewing machine, more or less. And then, yeah, we're currently 10, soon to be 11 staff, headquartered in Manchester, but work across the UK into mainland Europe and out in the USA, where we have a presence out there. As well, everything we do is data analytics, kind of talent focused, mid to senior level. And I guess, bird's eye view of the business is that you can probably separate out into two distinct areas from a kind of staffing perspective. You've got what most would recognize as a kind of executive search practice, where obviously that's kind of leadership appointments in the realms of, heads of directors, VPs, CDO type stuff,
Right.
which are obviously fewer and further between from a volume standpoint. The other side of our business is, and I guess really where the talent solutions tagline comes from, is kind of helping organizations to scale their data analytics capability. At volume usually. So typically the types of businesses we work with are either right at the start of their data analytics journey or are kind of in periods of hyper growth. So we worked with everything from VC backed, startup and scale ups through to FTSE 100s, Fortune 100s. It could look like helping a business to hire 80 people over a 12-month period. It could be working with a smaller business to find 4 or 5 people right now, and everything in between, really.
Right.
So yeah, that's the nuts and bolts.
Cool. And of course, that has led you to doing all sorts of wonderful things in the kind of the data space. And obviously, you've got your Driven by Data podcast, which similar to this is kind of opening up the conversation a bit further and shining a light on what really happens. But also, I think you've got some good and strong and interesting opinions driven by what you're actually seeing, not theory, but what you're actually seeing in the market, the conversations you're actually having with people, the discussions you and your team have with data teams. And I think that's really kind of helping to open this up a bit to people, right? And create a conversation about what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, and just have that dialogue, which is really important in the data community, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So, I mean, I started out hosting events about 5 years ago. That kind of led to a podcast kind of similar to yourself, right? I guess the whole value added back to the community thing. And I think probably again, similar to your business, despite what most people might think about recruiters. I think we have a fairly unique perspective of the marketplace, just given the breadth of
Yeah.
types and sizes of organizations that we speak to and engage with on a daily basis, right? And I think what fascinates me is that the challenge is whether we're talking about talent or whether we're talking about just, the implementation and execution of data and analytics inside those organizations, the challenges are often very similar, if not the same,
Mm.
just at different scales and
Yeah.
sizes of problem, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So the kind of there's this thing I mentioned before about job adverts, which always they sort of fill me a little bit with the conversations that I see, fill me a little bit with kind of angst, because there's so much that can go into a job advert in terms of what's behind it, what creates that end product, if you like, that ends up on a job board or in a recruiter's hands. But they need a bit unpicking, because they can go very wrong, can't they? And rarely do the really right ones bubble up either in terms of what people see. So there's a lot of discussion about where they're not very good, and yeah. So what's wrong? What's wrong here? What are people getting wrong with job ads? And does that change? Does that change from, if you're talking about a chief data officer role to a data engineering role, or a data governance specialist or something? So where are we at with job adverts, and where are people getting this wrong?
So as you said, I think that there's many variables that kind of are involved and also probably wrong with this. I think that the first thing that I always try to kind of make distinguish between is that job descriptions and job adverts aren't one and the same thing.
Yep.
Unfortunately, yeah, I'd say most businesses, and it's often through process more so than anything else. But a lot, especially bigger businesses, where they have some system which they put in a load of terms and it spits something out, right? And then they basically copy and paste that and put that as an advert. So I think that the fundamentals are that your job description is your nuts and bolts of what you want people to see once there's a level of interest being established. The advert should be more of a marketing play, really. Like that's
Mm.
your opportunity to sell the business, sell what you're
Yeah.
trying to do with data, why you're different, why someone should use you. I think top line fundamentals are dependent upon the role that you're looking at. Job adverts aren't that effective anyway, right? Because I guess if you think about where the bulk of recruitment happens in the data analytics space, it's usually at the practitioner level, right? Because there's only ever really need for one leader, whatever title that is. So the bulk of those leaders are then going hiring teams of analysts, engineers, scientists, architects, etc. So that's where volume of recruitment is done. But it's also those job titles and skill sets where there's more demand than there is supply.
Mm.
And therefore that means that these people aren't actively sat looking at job boards, looking at adverts,
Mm.
waiting for something to pop up on LinkedIn. So the kind of how effective they are is probably a separate question in its entirety. But I think the starting point of all of this is your opportunity to sell why you're different, and just a shopping list of technologies isn't the way
Yeah.
to do that. That said, the flip side of this conversation is that there's never been an easier time or a better time to stand out, right? If you get it right, it's so obvious
Get in
that
front of people.
it's
Yeah.
done right. Yeah, exactly.
So that's interesting. So there's a sort of bit of a thing there about job ads. So should you even have them in the first place? Is that the most effective way to find people, get in front of people, and share what this job's about? And secondly, once you have one, how do you make it effective? So I want to unpick those a little bit. So it an advert really is just as you say, a way of expressing, marketing the opportunity. So whether that's putting it on a job board or whether that's giving it to someone who might be interested, surely there's some kind of benefit of having that in the first place, right?
So yeah, 100%. You will need to have your job advert. I guess my point was, how effective they are in terms of getting the right type of person
Yeah.
applying to them. That's a completely different story. But
Gotcha.
yeah, of course, you need to make sure that you've got an advert in play for sure. But as I said, it's more of that needs to be a marketing document, a piece of material that really is highlighting all of the great things that you're doing with data, trying to do with data, an opportunity for you to show why you're different
Yeah.
effectively.
So why does that always end, or not always? Why does that most of the time end up with as being, as you say, a list of responsibilities and a small blurb about the company, a piece of paper that's not, if you think about marketing and advertising, we've got social media videos, we've got, interesting billboards, we've got all sorts of different ways of expressing selling something. But yet with job ads, it tends to be a list of functional or responsibilities or behaviors. But even the more creative ones are really just words on a long, 3-page document. So
Mm.
again, why are people doing that? Why hasn't that moved on?
Um, well, I think first of all, just to kind of go back a step to your point, if you think about, the rise of social media and the whole concept of social selling and how people now engage with brands through the use of social media,
Yeah.
that's a massive avenue that most companies just aren't leveraging at all, right? So, of course, you need a job advert, but that's not to say that that should be the only method that you use. Yet, in most instances, it is. So, obviously, I've been trying to put my finger on why we end up in this situation. And I think I've managed to boil it down to a kind of a few key points. I think, first of all, it's dependent upon who's leading this team, right?
Mm.
In terms of, is there a data leader in place or not? That often has a bit of a sway here, because obviously you'd expect most data leaders to be able to articulate a bit of a story and a vision better than, maybe a business that is first time to the market for something like this,
Yeah.
right? That's the first thing. The second thing is then the involvement of that person. So let's just say you're talking to an organization that has a data leader in place, how far removed they are from that process and their
Mm.
involvement in that process, in my opinion, has a massive, massive sway in terms of what that output looks like in terms of job descriptions.
Right.
Because I think there's this, what I would classify as a, misconception that this isn't my job. I'm not here to recruit, right?
Mm.
And of course, every data leader has a day job, but ultimately, my view on this is that, your success as a data leader is, intrinsically related and correlated to the team that you can build. So it's in
Yeah.
your best interest to be involved in that as much as you can.
And you
Um,
see, data leaders who sort of outsource that to HR or something and don't get
100%.
involved with the creation of the job ad. Right.
100%, yeah. So
Interesting.
it's more a case of, often that's not my job. That's why we have an internal talent team, so I don't have to focus my attention on that. Now, that's not to say that I'm sitting here saying, we expect data leaders to be doing the first screening and writing the
Yeah.
adverts themselves and all of that type of stuff, but it's more the involvement in that process, because what you have in between that is a data leader that has all the knowledge, or should have all the knowledge, in terms of how to articulate a compelling narrative and story around why they might be an attractive proposition.
Yeah.
And the gap then is that the internal recruitment team often don't have that skill, knowledge, and expertise. Now, that's not a reflection of them. I personally think internal recruitment teams have got the hardest job in the world, right? Because one minute they're trying to hire a cleaner, the next minute they're trying to hire an accountant, the next minute they're asking them
Yeah.
to hire a data architect. It's like they can't specialize in everything, and they can't know the narrative behind every single
Yeah.
market. So they need some help effectively.
Mm.
But often that help is missing, because the gap between data leader and hiring manager and internal recruitment team is kind of lacking, and therefore
Yeah.
what you get into is sometimes the process could look like, well, internal recruitment team wants to speak to hiring manager and kind of, doesn't really know the questions to ask them, so then they ask them the general questions that anybody would ask, like, what's
Yeah.
important for this role? Well, Power BI is important for this role. Okay, fine. And then
Let's write that
they start
down.
to
Yeah.
list a load of technologies that they'll be using on a daily basis, which, again, for the job description is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you try and then translate that to an advert, which the whole purpose of an advert is to attract and engage,
Yeah.
it doesn't fit for, it's not fit for purpose.
Is there a skills gap then? Because in some ways this job advert is about marketing the company and the story and the narrative, as you say, and the potential of the job, the potential of what will happen when you arrive, and the kind of things that you're going to be working on, and the exciting things that can happen. That isn't, that kind of like creativity, that marketing sort of brain, if you like, isn't traditionally sitting in a data function or an HR function. So is there a skills gap with the way people think about this?
I think there is a skills gap in terms of, yeah, the way they think about the process and how they are trying to engage with talent. I
Yeah,
think data leaders have the knowledge of, why are we more attractive than the business down the road, right?
yeah,
Because if you think about any person in the data analytics spectrum pretty much at this point in time, especially at the practitioner level, they will probably have a handful of opportunities, if not more, right, in terms of potential suitors. But yeah, I think it's a skills and knowledge gap around how to position what you're trying to sell. And that's why I always can refer back to the whole marketing piece. Obviously marketers by trade are creative, but they think about things from the lens of the people they're trying to sell to,
customer.
right? So
Yeah,
they'd be like, okay, where do they live? What's important to them,
mm,
etc., etc.
yeah,
The problem with most internal recruitment teams is they're great at recruiting in terms of the process by which they recruit, but in terms of positioning that narrative, A, they don't know what that narrative is, and B, they don't know who the audience is and what the
yeah,
wants, needs, and desires of that audience typically are. So, and look, don't get me wrong, it's really difficult. It's only by however many years of experience of having to go through the pain myself with this that you kind of start to learn and unpick things. What's important to an engineer is completely different
yeah,
to what's important to someone who works in data governance, right? So that kind of how you position that is needs to be different. But as I said, most adverts are a reflection of a job description. So they have
yeah,
a standardized generic blurb that says, ABC company is an award-winning
yeah,
pharmaceutical business, that blah 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 blah,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
just
yeah,
fluff that no one
yeah,
cares about. Like no one in
yeah.
the data industry looks at
Skip
that and goes,
that
"Oh,
and
that's
yeah,
exciting," yeah.
yeah,
But the next bit then is just a list of technical skills. It's like doesn't
yeah,
really tell me anything about the role.
yeah.
You know, do they have a data strategy? What does that data strategy look like? What's the business trying to get out of having this data team?
Yeah.
Who's
There's no
who?
story through
There's
it,
no
is there,
story.
about
No,
yeah,
no.
about where does this
Who's
take me?
the data leader? Do they have any pedigree in the market? Have they won any awards? How big's the team? What's that
Yeah,
team consist of? What does it look like? There's never any of that in a job
yeah,
advert. Ironically, you get that sometimes in job descriptions when you get into the nuts and bolts of getting those awful grids that go
yeah, yeah, yeah,
have you seen them, and it kind
yeah,
of like tells you the team size and stuff, but when you translate that into a Word document, it just pulls off the responsibilities,
yeah.
the tech skills that you need, and then a bit of a blurb. Um, and don't get me wrong, it's difficult because the needs and wants and desires of the industry are continuously evolving. At
Mhm.
one point in time, you'd see adverts littered with things talking about, I don't know, bean bags and beer fridges and
Yeah,
the whole cultural piece. Now people couldn't give
yeah,
a crap about that because they work from home, right? So it's
yeah.
kind of like it's um,
But I
constantly
mean, that's
evolving.
like that's why the job ad is important, isn't it? Because what is important and what the narrative is does need to change based on the role, who you're going after, the kind of person you want, the diversity of person that of people that you want to see, all those things, and that
Yep.
changes from potentially month to month and year to year. So you do always have to keep looking back at it.
Yeah.
How important is we sort of focus there on like the what the data function is doing and trying to achieve and what they're trying to do. How important is positioning the broader sort of employee value proposition, I think is the phrase that people-based businesses use, but that kind of like, how good is it to work at this business right outside of the objectives of the role? Even if you get that bit right, the objectives of the role and sell the story of data, like how important is that broader? Why is this the best place to work when in context of this industry?
So I think that comes back to again knowing your audience, who they are, and what's important to them. So the employer value proposition, I think is kind of getting to, especially in our industry, is almost on death's door a little bit, right?
Right.
If you think of Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Meta, Tesla, some of the big brands of this world, people will go and work for them regardless of how bad that environment is because they want
They
that
want it.
name
Yeah.
on their CV and resume, right? That's so they will because of who they are and what they stand for and the opportunities that will generate further down the line, they will never struggle to attract people.
Mm.
But I'd say everybody else is pretty much of a muchness now,
Mm.
and I think there's probably been, if you think about some of the major brands that we have in the UK here, for example, big Goliath organizations, I'd say there's probably more of a preference for people to lean away from them now because they're
Mm.
kind of like, it's not really exciting. Yes, they might be big. At one point in time, that was a driver, to go and work for a really big business. Now, again, things have changed. So I guess it all comes down to how good your employer value proposition is. If you can articulate the right type of message around why it's a great place to work,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
not going to hinder you at all. But again,
Yeah.
most places don't even do that
Mm.
well,
Right.
in all honesty.
Yeah, because that's yeah for me that's the bigger picture. So you sort of talk about Tesla there. They don't need to talk about their employer value proposition. Well, their value proposition is build the car for the future that or you help get us colonized on Mars. You know what I mean? There's like a proposition there which isn't just come
Yeah.
and do some engineering. So
Yeah.
that's what I sort in my mind. That's what I mean. There's sort of like the broader purpose, the kind of broader benefits package, the that are on offer, those sorts of things that really kind of like, yes, there's a broader purpose. Yes, I get something more than just the day job by working here. So yeah, as you say, it surely must be driven by what attracts people, and you got to target that. But there's a bigger play, and I don't know. I feel that helps sell the story, and then is what ends up in a job should end up in a job ad, not
Well,
as
I,
you say
I
the long
think
list.
I think if you can connect the dots, absolutely. I think I
Yes,
think
good
that's
point. Yeah.
I think that's probably where the issue lies,
Mm,
is that often they don't, right? So they, and again, this it comes back to what's important to people. So, and most businesses will use the same generic EVP for the business in terms of its purpose and its mission. Well,
yeah.
what's important to a lorry driver is completely different to what's important to a marketing executive, to what's
Yes.
important to a data governance specialist, to a data scientist.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, the EVP can be useful if it's kind of harnessed in the right way. But I think really, as far as the data analytics community goes, especially, they're more interested in getting under the bonnet of actually what's going on here. Why is
Yeah.
data being used? What are we trying to use it for? Because I think many people have, gone into the environments before where, things have been professed to be data driven in quotation marks, and we're working on the best projects, and
Yeah.
naturally they go in there and their work's not seen, it's not used, it's not
Yeah.
visible, it has no impact because it's not been adopted and the whole change piece hasn't happened and all of that type of stuff. And then they come
Yeah.
away from that feeling a little bit burnt.
Bit
So
jaded.
I'd
Yeah.
say now there's more of an emphasis on actually, yes, I could go to 5 or 6 places and do the same job. And that's why, always makes me laugh. There's a huge focus on day-to-day responsibilities. It's like, well, you're looking for someone that's got 15 years experience. I'm pretty sure they know
I
what they've been
know.
doing for
Yeah.
every day for the last 15 years. That
Yeah.
in a job advert is probably a waste of space, right? You could use that to sell the proposition a little bit more.
Mm.
So yeah, I think the data analytics community especially wants to get under the hood of, it's great. Yes, you're trying to do this, but what's the end goal in mind? How
Yeah.
do you piece all that together?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some interesting ways you can do that, isn't there? You can talk about all the problems that you need to fix, all the opportunities that there are to create a modern data platform or a
Yeah,
or a, high end analytics solution, or the use cases that are to be worked on. What what
100%.
what are what are the use cases that we're gonna solve, and where what value does that add to the business? That's what people want to know. That is exciting to work on.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing that is never in, the best you might get in a lot of these situations is, come and join our business. We're on the journey to being, data
Data
driven to
driven.
help make
Yeah.
more data, informed decisions. It's like, well, everyone's
Yeah,
everyone's
everyone's
doing
written
that.
that. Yeah.
That's no different, So it's yeah, it's an interesting landscape for sure.
Yeah, I must try getting Chat GPT to write me a job ad for a chief data officer.
Yeah.
Let's see what it does.
Well,
Probably about
oh yeah, well, I was having a back and forth with Pete Williams on LinkedIn the other day, and he was talking about Chat GPT and writing job adverts, and I I basically said that there's no way that ChatGPT wrote that job advert because there was a CDO advert that didn't have Python in it. And I was like, there's no training materials for this ChatGPT to have written that because it's not Python's not on there. So
Yeah, it must be all there because it's learned from the history, and
yeah,
the history is always there.
yeah,
Um, so, but like, I suppose, so in some ways, the level of, I suppose, creativity, marketing nous needed to do all those things we just talked about is a change, a sort of a transformation in some ways that hiring, not certainly one team, needs to sort of take into account. But practically speaking, I think job adverts are generally going to be, certainly short term for most people, are going to be some kind of representation of the job description. I think you said that at the start anyway.
yep.
And then hopefully they can pull out all the exciting parts and make it more than just the job description. But because of that, if the job ad is essentially a representation of the job description, let's take a step back a little bit then, because the job description, we just joked there about having Python on it. Are we getting job description? Are the market getting job descriptions right? Because if the job description's right, the ad's never going to be right. They're never going to work. You're never going to put the right things on it. Do people know
Well,
what they want? I suppose is the question. That then means
um,
that they ask for the right things.
I think that's very contextual to the situation at hand. So, if
Yep.
you're speaking with somebody, if I'm speaking with someone like yourself, you know the industry, so you know what you're after. So in that instance, yes, I'd say where that starts to waver a little bit is when you start to speak to organizations that are at the start of this journey and are looking for maybe their first hire in data, whether that's a leadership hire or not.
Mm.
Often, yeah, they don't have a clue, so they go and hire based on what they think they should be hiring. And often, as you've probably seen me harp on about many times, that they struggle to decouple data and IT. So,
Yeah.
you often get into this realm of that's what, especially at the leadership level, then you start to see those job descriptions pop up quite a lot where it's, it's almost due. I mean, to be fair, they've gotten better. Like they used to be purely tech focused, but now,
Right.
even at leadership level, they are getting better. But really all it's saying now is, well, yeah, we want you to be responsible for the whole data strategy and building the team, but we also want you to be able to code in Python and,
Yeah.
use GCP and so on and so forth. So I think it does depend. The leadership level, it's probably more prominent because that's probably more indicative of, they don't have someone in there that knows really
Yeah.
what they should be looking for.
Yeah.
So that certainly is a problem for sure. Yeah.
Is yeah, so I think your point there is if you're new into it, you don't yet know what kind of shape, size, nature, seniority you want or need. I mean, one of the things that I notice when I'm recruiting, I don't do a huge amount through, I suppose, traditional channels. Most of it's through sort of network and being introduced and that sort of thing. So and it becomes quite informal, and so it's sort of that ends up being how we've sort of built the team. But where I have sort of gone to market, there's certainly as a recruiter, sorry, as someone recruiting, I think you call them hiring managers. I You do learn as you go. You put something on paper, you go to market, you meet three or four people, you're like, do you know what, I think the nature of that, that thing that I thought was really important, now I've heard it back, it's not as important as I thought. And often you sort of, there's frustration all around then that you're changing your mind or you're not sure what you want, but actually all it's doing is sort of it's giving you a bit of food for thought when you meet people, when you're not trying to waste anyone's time, but you kind of
Mm-hmm.
you just learn some stuff about yourself and what's important and them and the market, and you're always making that judgment about, is this the right shape of person I want? Therefore, my advert might need to change. My job description might even need to change. Is that typical? Is that normally happen? Is that expected, wanted? Do people understand that?
Yeah. So I think, right at the top of any conversation I have, I'm trying to get into the weeds of what do you think you want? Why do you think you want that? What are you trying to achieve? And I can probably help to steer you in a direction of
Yeah.
what is most likely. Um, However, it's absolutely commonplace for, people to right, we need to hire this skill and these are at what's absolutely essential. And then you speak to a few people and you go, you know what, I don't think that is essential anymore. And actually that could open up the candidate pool and we might get,
Yeah.
might get better quality of person for bit less money, or whatever the case may be. So I'd say that is absolutely normal, and I think that probably happens in every sector in the world, right? Because you always
Mm.
start with an idea of what perfect looks like, and after speaking to a few people that you thought, on paper are perfect, you
Yeah.
realize actually there could be some room for maneuver here. So I'd say, yeah, that is um, absolutely normal. But I think where, as an example, where I feel that we've been able to do the best work, we help some businesses, as I said, that are right at the start of that journey, and they come to us and say, we're looking for someone to lead our data team and come in and build the strategy, and we think we need these people, and often it's kind of like, we want someone from a data science background. So I'll go, okay, why do you want someone with the data science background? It's like, well, that's where we want to get to. Okay, fine. And when I'm able then to kind of talk through, actually, if you're bringing someone in a pretty much greenfield environment to help you build a data strategy from scratch,
Mm.
it's really important that you get the right person to do that, who can think strategically and kind of operate at that level, because otherwise, you might set them off, you might set off running in a direction and go the wrong way for 2 years.
Yeah.
You've got 2 years back, and in 4 years you kind of break even and you've got really gotten anywhere. So um, I know it's all relative, and obviously size and scale plays a massive part. Like, there's some businesses that you need a technical leader at that point in time. They just need to build the infrastructure or whatever the case may be. So it
Yeah.
is all contextual, but I guess my point being is there's often a lot of times where we are able to say, that's, you're probably putting too much emphasis on these skills being important. Actually, where you're at in this journey, I'd say these skills are more important, and we can probably give you a flavor of both. We can send you both types of people, so you can talk to them and see
Yeah.
what works for you. However, unfortunately, in not in many instances, that advice isn't always appreciated, right? So they might say, well, yeah, but we just want someone that's come from a data science background because that's what we think, or we've had
Yeah.
someone in that's told us that's what we need, and it's like, well, okay, that's fine. It's it's on you. You're you pay the bills, so
Yeah.
it's one of them things. But yeah, it is all contextual to
Yeah.
to where
It,
the maturity basically of
it,
where they're
it,
at.
it does sound like this tongue-in-cheek thing we keep laughing at about job specs sort of having a bit of everything in it, because it sounds like that's because often people just don't know what they need. They don't know, or they want a bit. They do genuinely want a bit of everything because they've only got one hire or two hires. They're trying to like cram a whole team into two people, rather than going, no, I need some specialist help here and here. Or if they're going generalist, then they're going too deep. If you find to go generalist, but then you can't have deep specialism in everything at the same time. So I think people try and sort of shoehorn in a whole bunch of people into one job description and then for one job ad, which then must take much longer to then hire, or not, or you end up not taking someone on, or you take someone on who you think is a bit substandard because you couldn't find the person that had everything. So it sort of ends up being wrong all round.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, that's we can look at that from a pretty much immediately and say, for for what you for what you're looking to pay in the market, you can get those skills, or for that budget,
Yeah.
you weigh out, or actually that person doesn't exist. Like, you're
Yeah.
looking for three different people there. I think it's the reality of the situation is that the more specialist you go, the easier things become to identify. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're
Yeah.
saying, right, I want to hire just an NLP data scientist that needs to have these skills, and I couldn't care less whether they could talk to a brick wall or not, because they're just going to be sat in a corner. Absolutely fine, right? You can go, and
Yeah.
that's easy. I guess the difficulty then comes, as you say, when it is a little bit more broader, and they do want them to have an array of skills, and at some point there's always a trade-off, right? Even if you get the best technical whiz, who's also really good at change and transformation and communicating and all that stuff, even if they were equally good in both camps, they can't do both camps to equal measure
Same
from a
time. Yeah.
time perspective, right? So
Yeah.
that's where we talk to organizations around, really, what is important here. Is it the building of the infrastructure and all the dashboards or the models? Is that what you want, and why do you think that you want that? Or is it actually someone that's going to get this stuff used and into the business and really pick out what the business you can deliver value to. And I think that's where ultimately what it comes down to. But obviously, many job adverts are out there are done before that kind of engagement exists, right? So we'll often we need help to build this team. We're looking for 4 people. Here's the job specs. Can you help us? And I'll look at them and I'm like, not off those job adverts. I can't help you. But do you know what I mean? So like you
Yeah,
can get
yeah,
into that engagement needs to probably be done before, but obviously every organization under the sun wants to try and recruit themselves, right? Obviously from a
yeah,
cost perspective,
yeah.
as you'd expect. So yeah, it is difficult to get it right, but I think where it comes down to 2 things for me: the context of the situation. So if there isn't a data team or data person in there that knows really what they can get in the market, what's actually important, and how they articulate that. That's one instance. The other instance is there is a data leader in there, and often they're too far removed from the process of helping the
Right.
internal talent team to articulate how they position it to attract good people.
Yeah. Yeah, well, context is always important there. So great, and yeah, well, that's a great place to wrap up, Carl. It's been, yeah, it's really interesting. Job adverts. You just think, oh, stick a job ad out and try and recruit, but it is so much. There's so much that needs to go into it, and what we really haven't really talked about actually thinking about it is this isn't really a need someone now, go and recruit now, switch it all off, because if you're building a team, really what you want to do is portray and show what's happening sort of on a frequent basis. If you start selling a new product, you don't just go, here's the new product, does anyone want to buy it, and then disappear again. You build a picture in the market. But we don't do, lots of people don't do that with their business, to put them in a position where when they need to recruit, they are well known, what they're trying to achieve is well known, they've built some credibility. And I've seen some really successful data leaders build teams by having a presence, being known, showing up, being open and honest about what they're achieving, selling the picture about what they're achieving. And when they've then needed to recruit, they go, hey, I'm recruiting. People are like, yeah, I want to work for you because I get your journey and I get what you're achieving, and that's far easier for them to recruit some people. But not loads of people do that way.
No, very few people do it that way, but the ones that do it that way are normally hugely successful because it's like any business problem, right? There's a business will spin up a strategy to combat a challenge that it has or a problem that it often has, yet for some reason in the land of people and talent, there's not very few organizations that can sit there and say, yes, we've got a talent strategy in terms of we have a roadmap, we know roughly what our deliverables are against that roadmap, therefore if we work backwards from that, we know roughly when we'll need certain people and skills in a
Yeah,
certain seat by, and then there's a lead time based on notice periods, interview process, finding people.
yeah.
It should in theory be really easy to plot all of that out.
Hmm.
um, but very few businesses do that, and then they become very reactive. So it's like, all right, let's throw an advert up and see what we get.
Try and
And
recruit now. Yeah,
they'll often either not get very many applicants at all, or they'll get a load of applicants and none of them are relevant, and they just get frustrated,
yeah,
and all of that type of stuff. And yeah, the way the world is moving, it's the whole social engagement is massive. If I don't know, Gillette wanted to sell its razors, it wouldn't just put an advert up on LinkedIn as an example, would it? And expect
yeah.
loads of people to come flocking. There's been years of brand building,
Brand.
of
Yeah,
talking about the story, of advertising in the right places, so I think that whole engagement and networking piece is massive. If data leaders can get that right and start to get their name out there and tell a compelling story, which is ironic, right? Because in the industry, all we talk about is data storytelling. Yet for
yeah.
some reason, we fail to do that in terms of building what we classify as our biggest asset, which is people. So
Yeah. Well, there we go. Brand building, storytelling for data leaders. Important. Who knew? Kyle, massive thanks for coming on the show. Sorry it took us 3 years to do that.
that's all right.
Um,
I've just got over being offended. So
well, I'll make it up to you by getting the podcast out, and I'm sure people will be interested in the discussion. But yeah, thanks, buddy. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you again soon.
cheers. Thanks a lot.